Hey gamers, it's spooky season, so I decided that I wanted to make a creepypasta slash Halloween update for my game Sorcerer Shootout. If you somehow don't know what a creepypasta is, then I'm gonna let my friend Mr. Jefftastic explain it to you.
A creepypasta is essentially a horror story told through the internet. A lot of times, these stories center around cursed games or cursed copies of games. For example, we have the iconic story of Ben Drowned, or, well, the laughable Sonic.exe.
Thanks, Jeff. But without any further ado, let's put a creepypasta into Sorcerer Shootout.
If you play Sorcerer Shootout during the month of October, you'll start to see some strange things happen. Enemies will flicker and start glitching out. They say that this game was cursed for apparently being a ripoff of Micro Mages and Realm of the Mad God. This curse caused the enemies and the player to struggle to keep their identities.
The real horror of this game is the code that I wrote a year ago. Seriously, I put the movement code for every single enemy in a singular script. I have no idea why. None of them use the same movement system. I don't know why I thought this was a good idea. Anyway, the first thing that I actually did to get this flicker reflect working was to make a variable that would be set to true if it was October. I had never really tried doing this before, but I thought it wouldn't be too hard. I have all my global code in the particle system object for the game. Normally, this object is named something like the core or the heart, but it's essentially the same object I always make in all my games that handles the code that happens through every scene of the game regardless of what objects are in the scene. Anyway, in this object I used GameMaker's in-engine function to check the computer's clock and see if it was October. If it was, then I set the creepypasta variable equal to true. This isn't really the most effective way I did it right here with the two different variables, and I ended up switching it to where the first variable was just gone and I plugged the function right into the if statement. To actually get the enemies to flicker, I had a variable called flicker, and it basically counts down, and when it becomes less than 0, the enemy's sprite will change between all the sprites of the other enemies and the player. When the variable reaches -10, the variable resets to a random amount of time between 5 and 10 seconds. This also happens to the player, but it's shorter and only changes to the necromancer to not cause too much confusion while playing.
The enemies weren't the only ones suffering from an identity crisis though. The bosses were as well. They all wanted to be each other so badly that they fused into one grotesque amalgamation. But this curse seeped outside of the game and affected the developer as well, causing him to disappear for months and months at a time.
I decided I wanted to make a new Halloween slash creepypasta boss for the game as well. A lot of creepypastas feature twisted versions of existing characters and sometimes even fusing them. Like, for example, Undertale, while it's not necessarily a creepypasta, it's definitely creepy seeing the enemies that you face be twisted and fused together versions of themselves. But to get this effect working the way it does, I created a new boss object and had it switch between all the behaviors of the other bosses. This is where having that really awful, having all the movement code in one script actually came in handy, because I could easily just have the boss switch between the different forms of movement and therefore attacks and AI. I used the same flicker effect as the other enemies, I just prolonged it by quite a bit, so it's actually like a full second of flicker before it sticks to one of the bosses. The boss is a little glitchy and unbalanced, but I'm not really that worried about it because A, it's only going to be available through the month of October, and B, a lot of creepypastas are just glitchy versions of games anyway. When you defeat the boss, I made it to where it just has a permanent flicker between all the death animations of the other bosses, and it also releases like the hurt particles from all the other bosses. But that'll about do it. If you liked this video and want to play the new update for yourself, then check out the description and there will be a link to it. I want to give a special thanks to Jefftastic for doing the Creepypasta bits. He's a fellow game developer who's been doing Creepypasta-esque videos on Super Mario 64 recently. Check him out. There's a link in the description for his channel as well. Yeah! Bye!